Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. So good morning and welcome to our council meeting for Thursday the 9th of August. We'll start with item 1, which is apologies, and I have apologies from absence from the Mayor and from Councillor East, and I have apologies for early departure from Jimmy Chen and from Anne Galloway. So I'm happy to move those apologies. Mike Davidson's happy to second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Declarations of interest. I haven't received anything, but obviously if anything comes up during the course of the meeting, please make it known. Tim? Tim for V-Base, of course, yes. All right, thank you. Now move into public participation. We'll start this morning with a public participation item from Genevieve Robinson regarding construction at Littleton Port and Hector's Dolphins. So, Genevieve, if you'd like to come forward to the table, please. Thank you for joining us this morning. You're very welcome. You've got 5 minutes to present to us this morning. Thank you.
Are they all on?
Yep, if the green light's on the microphone, yep. It's working.
Right. I believe LPC has not done due diligence in investigating alternative construction methods or alternative wharf locations for this project. This is at Littleton. And that as the only shareholder, you have not demanded more transparent actions for the welfare of the endangered species. That Hector's dolphin is considered endangered at a national and international level. While their main threats surround fishing activities, construction activities also have been identified as another threat. Hectors are regularly recorded within the harbour area, with around 10 to 20 individuals there at any one time. Past studies, information you have, shows clear avoidance reactions to pile driving activity within the inner harbour. Professor Stephen Dawson of Otago University is an underwater acoustics and Hector's dolphin biology expert. He holds several recordings of dolphins as close as 370 metres from recent LPC-based piling sources. This shows a decrease in the rate of dolphin echolocation. Detections was evident on days with piling compared to days without. The dolphins are displaced into areas of the harbour, thereby putting them more at risk of other threats. The pile driving noise levels could cause temporary hearing damage to hectors if they remain at close range to wharf construction. Marine scientist Dr. Elizabeth Sluton considers the current self-regulated threshold of 146 decibels used by LPC for their current land-based piling very loud and causes hearing damage. As an absolute minimum requirement, LPC should be constantly measuring noise levels, not making assumptions that the piling will be under that level. Throughout pile driving operations of 2015 and 16, Littleton Port Company used marine mammal observers to monitor the area surrounding pile driving. You have a graph there showing pile driving activities. LPC says they will do this again for the new berth design. However, there is no indication at what stage of the piling this monitoring will commence. There is a different standard of care being applied to this particular project, which puts the port recovery plan under scrutiny. Firstly, using marine mammal observing program alone has little ability to effectively protect dolphins and virtually none from behavioural impacts. As for each dolphin spotted above the water, another lies below. This is fact. During previous wharf construction, using rammed piles, Hector's sightings were recorded within 300 metres shutdown zone during pile driving. LPC Project Director Jared Peterson advised that on the 27th of July, he still had no idea who the trained mammal observers would be and who would be training them, though he did believe that Cawthron would be initiating this at some stage. He believes there is no urgency in obtaining relevant documents for peer review or opinion, and that observers would only be used during sea-based piling. Currently, more than 330 land-based piles have been rammed into rocks at the entrance of the inner harbour, and I use land-based very lightly. Once again, a photograph I took on Monday. As you can see from the photograph, the piles are exceptionally close to water level, offering basically no land between piling and water itself. Mr. Peterson also advised that noise levels of the current land-based piling were below their self-imposed threshold of 146 decibels, but was unable to accurately tell me what level. As New Zealand has no underwater noise regulations except for the voluntary Code of Seismic Surveys, LPC is applying its own untested data in an environment that needs special attention. Last year, LPC contracted Cawthron to conduct an assessment of the effects of marine mammals for Littleton Port Company's channel deepening project, authored by Deanna Clement. Within assessment, the Hector's Dolphin Peninsula population is listed between 2,000 and 6,000 individuals. Well, research published by scientists, published in scientific journals by Otago University, indicates a more realistic population of 1,000. That's slightly different. With such inflated information informing port risk management, there can be little confidence of impact and mitigation accuracy. Therefore, the real issue we need to consider here is the noise pollutant itself, the pile driving, and the piles itself. Dawson and Lunison offer the only research and recordings offered by rammed piling noise pollution in the area. During previous consent process last year, marine scientist Eva Lunison approached Piletech's Mike Abbott for advice on using screw piles. Although the original piles were 1,200 mils and the pile driver technology was not available in New Zealand, Mr. Abbott did say screw piles would be viable if smaller. Well, this brings us to the new berth design. James Wood, also of Piletech, offers conflicting information. He said that while screw piling would be quieter, engineering viability in this situation was the issue.
Yeah, that brings us to the end of the 5 minutes. I will give you a little, a small amount of time just to finish up. Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, that's fine. Try. Thank you very much. I have requested all relevant information from LPC 14 days ago. I've also done a Lagoima. I have no information on the design, the pile loadings, the calculations, or geotech information I've requested. A civil engineer with 50 years' experience in wharf design has requested this information and is going to do a peer review for me for free. However, without this information, I am unable to advance this further. It's not up to me or others to conduct this vital research. It's up to LPC and it's up to you guys as shareholders. By manipulating this design to fit within the scope of the port recovery plan, I'm sorry, but LPC is avoiding proper scrutiny of its plans and actions. We ask for transparency, expert advice, peer review, marine mammal observers now, not in 2 months' time. We also ask for safety and risk procedures in place and the postponement of piling if necessary until next winter. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed for the presentation. Now there are a number of documents that have been uploaded to the hub for councillors. Yes. So we've heard the presentation this morning. We've got a number of supporting documents that are available and have been available for councillors.
This morning I've just been handed this from LPC.
Yeah, which is their Q&A document.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I haven't
also
seen it prior to now.
Yeah, that's also been uploaded for councillors as well.
I do want to say one comment though, based on something here. Deanna Clement is unpublished in her research. I'm sorry, you don't get any credibility unless you're published in a scientific journal.
All right, so
that's all I have to say.
I note that comment.
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge the letter from World Animal Protection, which has also been circulated. Yeah. I think the most sensible thing to do with the information that you've provided us this morning, the written information and what we've heard verbally this morning, we've got Paul Munro, the Chief Executive of CCHL, who's actually in the public gallery at the moment, and I'd like to refer the matters that you've raised to Paul, yes, so that he can refer those on to LPC, yeah, and so that we can get some information back from LPC addressing the issues that you've raised, yeah, and obviously that's something that would then be considered by councillors, but it would allow us to get the information back from the port addressing the matters that you've raised. There's some new information that you've raised in the verbal presentation that it certainly would be good. You know, we need a level of confidence around these things, and I think to refer to CCHL so that we can get that level of confidence back from LPC or ask further questions as we need is the way to go.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much indeed
Cheers.
for taking the time to present to us this morning. Thank you. So apparently we've got Yanni Johansson, who has joined us this morning by AV Link. Yanni, good morning.
Good morning, thank you.
All right, and welcome to the meeting. Great. So moving on to our second item of public participation this morning, we have got the Selwyn House School problem-solving team. Now this item will take the form of a presentation from that team, and then I've got some certificates to present once the presentation has occurred. So we've got a 5-minute presentation first, and then I'll be very pleased to present some certificates following on from that. So if the students would like to come up to the front. Thank you. Pauline, yeah, did you want to make some introductory comments? Now you've arranged all of this, haven't you?
I'd love to make some comments and welcome the girls here today. They've been to our Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee and told us all about their amazing project. But these girls were the New Zealand Future Problem Solving winners, and they went on to compete in the International Future Problem Solving competition in Wisconsin and were placed third. So third in the world, and I think this is really worthy of a big celebration. And the title of their problem was, or is, Let's Bike Christchurch. And it involves a unique promotion idea, which they pitched to our committee earlier this year, and they'll talk to us about it today. We absolutely loved it, and we've expressed a strong desire for the City Council to work with them in any way that we can to get this project up and running. So without further ado, let's hear from the girls themselves.
All right, so you've got 5 minutes to present to us, and then we'll present the certificates. So yeah, welcome, and we're certainly looking forward to hearing from you this morning.
Hi everyone, we're the Let's Bike Christchurch team from Selwyn House School, and we're here to tell you about our project.
I'm Bonnie. I'm Cleo. I'm Alice. I'm Kate. I'm Lucy. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Sophie. And I'm Mia.
And I'm Reid. At Selwyn House School in Year 8 and Year 7, you can choose to do community problem solving. We are all in community problem solving. Community problem solving is when you find a problem in the community and solve it. We are all very passionate about cycling, so we did some research and found out that the Christchurch cycle lanes aren't being used as much as the Christchurch City Council wanted them to be.
We want to increase the usage of the cycle lanes in Christchurch. We will deploy 16 Let's Bike Christchurch signs that look like this in local cafes and cycleways. Once you find your bike, you can take a picture with it and upload it to social media using the hashtag Let's Bike Christchurch. We wanted to get an aspect of the community involved with our project, so we decided to contact local schools around the cycle lanes to decorate these bikes. They did a wonderful job with creating them, and we had a strict criteria that we wanted them to follow, and they all followed them very well. We also got asked back to Island School to speak in their assembly, and it was just a short presentation, and we really enjoyed doing that.
So last year we represented Selwyn House School in the Future Problem Solving National Competition in Auckland, and then this year we represented New Zealand in the Future Problem Solving International Conference and came out in 3rd place.
We have also been working on designing a website using Squarespace. The website will include information about our project and why we decided to do it, our promotional and PSA videos, a link to the Christchurch City Council, and of course how to get involved with our project. The website is still a work in progress, but it will be ready for the launch event in September, and also a big thanks to Kate Spence, who is now helping us with the website.
We have also created a PSA, a public service announcement video, with the help of our IT technician Jimmy. This video will help to promote our idea and give people a good idea of what we want to achieve.
On
behalf of the Let's Bike Christchurch team, I want to say a special thank you to Peter Hume and Brendan Bisley for all of the support and advice they have given us. We could have never got to America without them.
We would like to thank the ITE committee for all their help and support throughout this project. Now we will show you our PSA.
All right. While we're trying to get the video to work, are there any questions that councillors might like to ask the Selwyn House team? No. Pauline.
My committee might like to ask them, but how many hours do you think you put into this project collectively? Any idea? I mean, has it been a really, really big job?
Yeah, like months.
Yeah, we can't really count.
We started the project mid last year, and we've kept it going even though 3 of us have gone off to high school and 2 separate schools. It's been difficult, but we've made it work.
Oh, well done, good on you. So you're doing any like weekend work and after school?
When we were preparing for internationals, we were having a couple of weekend meetings, but other than that, normally just school time.
Because we have a set time in school, which is this time today, and all like FPS and CNPS work on it, so that's really helpful for doing our project.
Great. Let's have a look at the video, which is now working.
Attention people of Christchurch!
Did you know that an amazing new cycle network is under construction as part of the earthquake recovery program?
Christchurch is now crisscrossed with dozens of kilometres of cycle lanes, shared paths and designated cycleways. We can now bike around Christchurch safely and quickly. How cool is that?
But if that wasn't enough, we've got something that's sure to get you out and about on your bike. Selwyn House School is partnering with the Christchurch City Council to deploy 16 Let's Bike Christchurch signs all over Christchurch.
So get on your bike, search for the Let's Bike Christchurch sign, then post a pic of yourself with the sign and upload it to social media using the hashtag Let's Bike Christchurch to win some awesome prizes.
Come on Christchurch, get onto 2 wheels or 3, get cycling and get snapping.
So thanks for the excellent presentation this morning, and thanks for showing us that particularly excellent video as well. It's great stuff. So congratulations on the work that you've been doing promoting cycling in Christchurch, but also congratulations on winning the New Zealand stage of the Future Problem Solving competition, and also well done for being placed 3rd at the International Future Problem Solving competition in Wisconsin. I think that's a huge achievement by anybody's standards, so well done. That's great, and even better that you've come here to tell us all about it this morning. Your project's got the potential to have much broader benefits than just for yourselves and for the school. We're obviously creating the major cycleways network in Christchurch, and one of the reasons we're doing that is to make it safe for school students to get safely to and from school, but also there's a recreation benefit to having those cycleways there as well. So it's absolutely fantastic that you've come up with this project to encourage children and families and people in general to get out there and really use and enjoy the cycleways. And of course everything that you're doing is promoting the fact that the cycleways are there and encouraging people to use them. So what I've got now is some certificates that I'd I'd like to present to you to really recognise the great achievement that, that you've got here. So we'll present the certificates. I'll invite you to come forward one at a time, and then there'll be an opportunity for a group photograph at the end if that's what you'd like to do. All right. All right, so I'll call you up one at a time. Do we need this microphone? Oh, for the live stream, okay. Okay, so I'd like to call you up one at a time. So first of all, Claire McLeod. And then, oh, maybe we should post the photo before she Okay, and then next, Sophie Hodgson. And next, Lucy Maynard. Maya Halstong. Reed McHugh. Alice Hunter. Bonnie Smith. Phoebe Donald. Last of the students, but certainly not least, Kate Gourley. And then we've got a certificate for the teacher as well, Adele Staples, if you'd like to come forward.
That's perfect. We want to make sure we can get our award in at the back too, the cycleways. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so that ends the public participation section of the meeting. We've got one deputation still to come. But before we we'll move to the deputation next. So I'd like to invite Ron McCandlish to the table, please. So Ron, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We've got a paper on the agenda that what you're presenting potentially relates to. So we're treating this as a deputation to the meeting. That means you've got 10 minutes, but that would include time that you might want to leave for any questions. So a maximum of 10 minutes, including questions. Clearly, we've got some literature which has just been distributed now. So you have 10 minutes to present to us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to talk to you about the vexed question of chlorine in the water supply. My name's Ron McCandlish. I'm the CEO of a company that has American technology that offers a far better alternative to treating water than chlorine. And I have a folder here with a few items in it, which I'll go through. The very first item is a picture of the World War II War Memorial at Washington DC, which is a massive presentation with over 400,000 gallons of water in the form of reflection pools and fountains. It is entirely treated by this descalomatic system and is maintained since 2004 in sparkling condition. The second picture is in the machinery room for the War Memorial, and it shows two 800 gallon per minute descalomatic water treatment. And also on the wall there are two copper-silver ionisation units that are used to disinfect the water. The third photo is of an installation in Taiwan showing that there's quite a bit of flexibility with this system. There's actually three 200 gallon a minute units there in tandem working into a manifold, and the same can be done with the copper silver ionisers. They can be scaled for any amount of water flow. The next piece of paper is from a company called Carefree Clearwater Limited, who actually manufacture copper silver ionisation systems. They were actually licensed to do this by NASA. This system was invented by NASA to treat water for Apollo astronauts, and it's actually still used today in the International Space Station. So it's got to be good, because there's no taps up there. In here, there's a very brief summary. The copper, silver and zinc ions are cationic and surface active and extremely potent biocide. The positively charged ions form electrostatic bonds with the negatively charged sites on the microorganism cell walls, distorting permeability and preventing the proper intake of nutrients. This, coupled with protein denaturization, causes cell lysis and death. Bacteria are killed rather than merely suppressed. Ions provide residual protection and prevention of any recontamination. Also, ionisation is 100% effective in all water temperatures, prevents corrosion in all types of piping, is an excellent biofilm penetration with extremely low residual effects, and is affected throughout the entire system of plumbing, including low flow areas. This is in addition to the environmental safety, automation and economic benefits documented and proven over the last 2 decades. This is not new, this is well-proven technology. Then there is some notes and quotes from some professional papers. The one in particular here, which is extremely powerful, it's experience of the first 16 hospitals using copper-silver ionisation for Legionella control and implications for the evaluation of other disinfection modalities. This is a world-recognised paper written by Janity Stout, who's a PhD, and Victor L.U., who is a medical doctor. I've highlighted some points in here. I won't go over the whole thing, but the conclusions from this study it represents the final step in a proposed 4-step evaluation process for disinfection systems that includes demonstrated efficacy of Legionella eradication, anecdotal experiences in preventing Legionnaire's disease in individual hospitals, controlled studies in individual hospitals, and validation and confirmatory reports from multiple hospitals during a prolonged period of time, between 5 and 11 years. Copper-silver ionisation is now the only disinfection modality to have fulfilled all 4 evaluation criteria. Of the 16 hospitals responded to the questionnaire, the hospitals were in 8 different states. The mean number of beds was 435, these are not small hospitals, and 56% of them performed transplant surgery. All of the 16 hospitals originally surveyed in 1995 responded to the follow-up survey in 2000. All were still using copper-silver ionisation for Legionella disinfection. The duration of system operation ranged from 5 to 11 years, with a mean of 7 years. 94%, 15 out of the 16, continued to perform routine environmental monitoring for Legionella at various intervals. Testing was performed quarterly in 4 of the hospitals, every 6 months in 4 of the hospitals, or annually in 3 of the hospitals. The emphasis here on Legionella is that Legionella is like the canary in the coal mine as far as pathogens in potable water are concerned. On page 3, no cases of hospital-acquired Legionnaire's disease were diagnosed after the installation of the copper-silver ionisation system in 94% of 15 out of the 16 of the hospitals. One hospital did report a case of hospital-acquired Legionnaire's disease soon after installation, basically before the system had settled down. Now, discussion. Disinfection and modalities currently in use for Legionella control in hospital water distribution systems include copper-silver ionisation, thermal eradication, which is superheat and flush, and hyperchlorination. Hyperchlorination has proven disappointing as a long-term solution due to the high expense, the pipe corrosion, the introduction of carcinogenic byproducts into the drinking water, and difficulty in maintaining a high concentration, 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine, needed to sustain efficacy. In the past few years, carcinogenic byproducts from chlorination and increases in birth defects and spontaneous abortion have raised concerns from federal agencies and consumer interest groups. A meta-analysis of 10 case control studies and 2 cohort studies concluded that the risk of cancer from the consumption of chlorinated water was significant. Spontaneous abortions have also been linked to the consumption of chlorinated water. Although ozonation instantaneous heating systems and ultraviolet light were conceptually attractive solutions in field trials, failures have outweighed successes. Moreover, no controlled studies of 5 years or longer have been reported for any of the three methods. Controlled studies have supported the biologically plausible concept that the single most important factor in decreasing the incidence of hospital-acquired Legionella disease is the eradication of the reservoir for this microorganism. The uniform finding of disappearance of hospital-acquired Legionnaires' disease in 16 diverse hospitals catering to different patient populations in different geographic areas confirms the primary importance of the reservoir in the causation of Legionnaires' disease. In fact, there were no cases of hospital-acquired Legionnaires' disease during the 4 years from 1999 to 2002. 75%, or 12 of the 16 of the surveyed hospitals, reported the failure of previous attempts to control Legionella by other methods.
Now that brings us to the end of the 10 minutes, so if I can ask you just to quickly wrap up, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. The file also contains, there's another paper here from American Society of Healthcare Engineers confirming what we've just learned. There's a very good table there looking at all the different forms of disinfection of water. Once again, copper-silver ionisation is very highly regarded, and hyperchlorination is not a good look, to say the least. The other papers in here are from large American companies that are independent of those papers I've just quoted. They have worked with descalamatic for decades and have found the water treatment systems to be absolutely first class. They do what they're supposed to do.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for providing this information and for taking the time to present to us this morning. Unfortunately, that doesn't allow time for questions, but what I am going to do is to bring the water paper that's on our agenda up the agenda so that we discuss that next. We've got the literature that you've provided. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time to present this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we next move to, so that was deputations by appointment. Item 4, presentation of petitions. There are none. Item 16, the resolution to include supplementary reports in the meeting. So I'm happy to move the resolution that we receive and consider the water supply programme report in this meeting. So we've got that in front of us. I'm happy to move that. Pauline's happy to second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. And now let's move to that supplementary report, which is item 17, the water supply programme update. So Helen, welcome to the table. Thank you very much indeed for preparing this report, and we'll invite you to speak to it in just a moment. I mean, this obviously is an update on the resolutions that we passed back in April, where we raised a clear expectation that the chlorination of the water supply would be for 12 months. Any extension of that would require a further council resolution. It's great to have this paper in front of us today showing us the work that you're doing towards reducing the amount of chlorine in the water supply and obviously turning the chlorine off at certain pump stations, and what the programme looks like to reduce the amount of chlorine and get more and more unchlorinated water into the network as we go. So I'll hand over to you to speak to the report, but thank you very much indeed for providing this detailed information to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have an update on the water supply improvement programme, and we are planning and doing at the same time. So some of this is an update on stuff that is done, some of it is an update on work in progress, and some of it is an update on where we are with our planning, and we're still exploring other options. So some of the report probably raises more questions than answers. So in terms of maximising the delivery of untreated water, we have moved from 5% of the supply, and we expect to have 24% of the supply without chlorine treatment by the end of August. So that's from the 4 pump stations out of our 53, the 4 pump stations that are permanently without chlorine, and another 7 where we can deliver to winter demand levels by isolating the one below ground wellhead and maximising the delivery from the secure above ground wellheads. So that's the reducing chlorine across the city. We've also got the first tranche of major remedial works underway, so that's at another 7 pump stations, and some of those overlap the ones where we've temporarily isolated, so it's hard to keep track of the numbers, but that first tranche of works delivers about 17% of our supply, and once those works are completed, those will be permanently without chlorine as well. The second tranche of works is some 17 pump stations, 49 wells across the city, and that's where the indicative timelines for that work begin in February next year and run out to 2020. So that is where the timelines are quite challenging in terms of the major remedial works. We've outlined in the paper some things that we're doing to try and advance those works. The first is to get more drilling rigs and specialist contractors on board. That may or may not help, because it really, one of the biggest constraints is the number of wells that we can turn off at any one time, and that's where we've talked about water conservation. A second possibility is to do some interim remedial works to some of the below ground wellheads that are in quite good condition, and get sign off on those and defer the major remedial works and the raising of those above ground to further out, so 2 or 3 years out. Another possibility is rolling out more ultraviolet treatment. So we'll bring you a paper 23rd of August council meeting on ultraviolet treatment for main pumps, and that remains an option for some of our other larger pump stations around the city, and we'll have a look at that. And another thing that we're doing as we're doing works on the pump stations is where we suspect that some of our pump stations could actually deliver more water, we're doing some step testing of those wells, and it may be that we can deliver more water from some of our pump stations and by upgrading some of the pumps there. So that's another option. The other aspect of the work is the research that we commissioned into international experience, and you've got that full report there, and that clearly demonstrates that chlorination is no silver bullet in terms of public safety. So the experience in Western Europe, and particularly in the Netherlands, where 85% of their supplies are without chlorine, shows that you can get very good public health outcomes. They have rates of waterborne disease that are 4 or 5 times lower than in the United Kingdom or in the United States, where chlorination is mandatory. So it's good to see that it is possible. So just reminding you that you will get another report on the 23rd of August on the ultraviolet disinfection at main pumps, and you can expect another report on those tranche 2 works and some real timelines, given exploring all of those other aspects to accelerate it in October. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to questions. Phil.
Helen, thank you very much for your report. It's very full and clearly backed up with the other reports. But your point about the chlorination not being a silver bullet, and you refer to that in your report. So I'm just wondering, given that's the case, that in fact, from the report, protozoa, people wouldn't be protected from the protozoa, say. I'm just really wondering why the Havelock North report supported so much chlorination as sort of like a primary defence.
So chlorination is an effective barrier to bacteria and other pathogens in the water supply. It's just not the only barrier. So there are other barriers that can be used in combination and still get those public health outcomes.
And I guess one of the other ones you're going to give us more information on in the next report is the UV.
Yes. Yeah. So that will come to you 23rd of August.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Glenn.
Thank you, Helen. And on the same theme that Phil's just asked, so for those who haven't got the report or access to it, today. What are the main barriers aside from chlorination used in those European countries? Because we know that this is about barriers, of which chlorination is one.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which we are putting, or perhaps New Zealand, all the eggs into one basket.
So the, I think that New Zealand, the current drinking water standards do talk about a multi-barrier approach, and the key principle really coming out of the Havelock North report is that you should have a very high standard of care and vigilance about any public water supply. And then they go on to talk about a multi-barrier approach. They do regard chlorination as essential within that multi-barrier approach, but I think that international experience says that it isn't necessarily so. Well, it is one barrier, it's not necessarily an essential one. So in terms of the Dutch approach, the first thing is making sure you've got very good source water, and they favour groundwater over surface water because it's generally a safer and cleaner water source. And indeed, that is one of the criterion for a secure bore status here, is that we have good source water and that we constantly monitor that and know that it's good. Then the second part, of course, is in your headworks, so having that secure borehead and the works that we're doing to improve ours, and then looking through your whole network, so ensuring that you maintain and run your network very well indeed, and that you have very tight control of any repairs or maintenance procedures. So when you're taking things offline and putting them back, that you're very clear that you're not introducing contamination when you're doing that.
Thank you, Pauline.
That's following on from that, and thank you. Really good report, Helen. I've just made a note here that looking at the Dutch practices, and they've quoted in one of these reports that chemical treatment should be kept to a minimum, and that's what they believe. But they do have a higher cost for delivery, they have lower leakage, and lower transgression rates. Now my question is, lower transgression rates than what? Is that comparing to New Zealand or the rest of the world?
Compared to New Zealand and the rest of the world, yes.
But Christchurch, we haven't had any transgression rates as far as I know.
We have had transgressions in our reticulation. Yes, we have. So generally at our reservoirs, it's the main place where we have E. coli transgressions.
So we haven't had any major transgressions. I mean, how many have we had?
No, we haven't had any recorded outbreaks of waterborne disease either from our networks. But we do get the occasional E. coli transgression in our network, and those rates are higher than experienced in the Netherlands.
Well, I've never seen any figures on those transgression rates, and John Mackey's constantly told us at the ITI committee that we haven't had any transgression rates in life. Small numbers, yeah. So is it possible
so
to get
Dave Adamson may wish to comment on that.
We've got a water safety plan which is approved by the Medical Officer of Health, which talks about that transgression. We do get minor transgressions. I think the major ones really that are happening around the reservoirs, and so we will do an operations there, and we've been sealing our reservoirs. We've spent a lot of money on doing that kind of work. The transgressions are reported. You will see them reported in the quarterly or the 2-monthly report with John, but they're normally one. You know, they are absolutely at the low end. We chlorinate, we retest 24 hours later, and they've gone. So they are a little blip, but in actual fact, our water safety plan says we will move very, very quickly on even the little blips. So, you know, they're not big, but they are constantly there, and as Helen says, they're principally in the reticulation. But they could be where someone's dug through a reticulation one, through a bit of reticulation, and dirt's gone in, all sorts of things like that. You'll always get some minor discretions within the reticulation system. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to reinforce that, they have been minor,
yes,
and not numerous.
That's correct.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Raf, Vicky, and then Aaron. Raf.
Yeah, thank you. Helen, I refer to item 5.42.5 on page 13, where it says, since the Canterbury earthquakes and until December 2017, the city's water supply had a provisionally secure status and complied with the drinking water standards without the need for treatment. 22nd of August 2017, the annual compliance report was received from the drinking water assessor confirming that the Christchurch water supply was compliant with the drinking water standards at that time. That changed, obviously, in December when the Director General issued a loss of secure water status. I guess my question is, we were quite happy with the water supply at that time. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that would be fair to say.
So the reason that we've chlorinated is because we were facing a compliance certificate from the Medical Officer of Health, not because we suddenly were worried about our water supply.
We had the regular annual inspection of the wellheads, and that inspection came back saying that they would not be signed off as secure.
Yeah, but until that point, we were not concerned about the state of the wellheads or the water supply.
I might ask Dave Adamson to come to the table if we're going to go back in time.
Council had a program of updating wellheads that kicked in, and look, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, about 2011, I think, where we were raising all of our below-ground wellheads to above-ground wellheads. We had a very, very extensive monitoring program over the quality of water coming out of all of our wellheads, as well as in the reticulation. So we've got a multi-faceted supply. We were not getting transgressions out of any of our wellheads, and so we were, and you were, we were advising and we were putting money into looking after the breakage in our reticulation. We were looking at upgrading our wellheads, sorry, not our wellheads, our reservoirs, because we believe we were getting ingress from birds and things like that came and sat, because a lot of our big concrete reservoirs had cracked. You actually replaced quite a significant amount of them. So we were putting our effort, our concerns at that time were our reticulation and on reservoirs, yes, and that's really where we were putting our effort. So at that time, we also had...
Just stop you, just going back to the actual question. Yeah. We did not have any concern about our water supply.
We had no concern about the quality of water coming out of our wellheads, and our upgrade program, as you said, with that report that came from the drinking, had been shared with the Medical Officer of Health. So we had an improvement program that incorporated the slow upgrade of our wellheads, and that improvement program was agreed by all parties as at the end of June, really. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And things changed, obviously, from the second report from Havelock North.
Thank you. Vicky and then Aaron. Vicky.
Mine's to you, Dave, and concerns the 5.44 in terms of the current review of the three water sector being led by the Department of Internal Affairs, who I rang this morning just because, having read all their data, what concerned me was that they were actually putting the cost of the drinking water, wastewater and stormwater from the small local authorities who face a massive bill onto urban areas. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the model that they've provided of Christchurch being linked with these possibilities, do we know anything about the cost of, for example, 2/3 of the South Island in terms of bringing its drinking water, wastewater and stormwater up to speed, and which they would like to put on to the good people of Christchurch?
I would say the Department of Internal Affairs sees cost as being quite a large barrier. Now, there has been some work done by the Water Managers Group that's gone up to the Chief Executives Group, which I'm not sure whether it's gone on to the mayoral group, looking at the Canterbury costs, but not looking at the bigger South Island costs as far as I know.
Perhaps I can comment on that. So no, it hasn't gone to the mayoral forum. It was really just a stock take. The information is included in each council's long-term plan. Not all councils have budgeted for an increased cost over and above their general maintenance.
So they haven't even budgeted to get their water up to standard?
Not well, because they don't know what the standard is going to be.
Right.
So it varies across the various councils.
Right. Right. Great. I'll have more to say about that when we debate. Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Now, just a little bit of a follow-on from Vicky's point around that regional usage, because when we look at the recommendations that have gone to government following Havelock North, and like Raf said, we had no concerns about our water supply. Pauline had raised that no one's ever been sick from Christchurch's potable water supply, and that was confirmed by Alistair Humphreys. That we're kind of like, this feels like throwing the baby out with the drinking water by putting the whole country in the same basket. And when you look at on page 5.44, the maps, the purple one of the top half of the South Island, or even the one that covers most of Canterbury, if that is to come in, would you go to the lowest common denominator, in which case would end up being chlorinated, because out in Darfield they're pulling from wells and they have transgressions all the time, or various areas around Canterbury? Does that then force us into chlorination rather than staying independent, drinking the best drinking water in the world, and not treating it like other parts of the country?
I think there are two separate but related processes going on here. So one is the Department of Internal Affairs review of the delivery of 3 water services across the country, and there is no doubt that there are problems with the delivery of those services and the quality of those services across the country, particularly in small centres. So that is one piece of work. And then the related piece of work is the Ministry of Health work looking at the response to the Havelock North Inquiry Stage 2 report. And it's that work that is talking about setting up an independent drinking regulator. So it's a regulator, not a delivery model. And that regulator would be the one setting what the drinking water standards would be. Now, I'm pretty sure that the drinking water standards will continue to take a risk-based approach, and that something as prescriptive as chlorination is likely to be in the context of that risk-based approach. So it would depend on what the issues are for each supply, and it wouldn't be a blanket requirement to do any one thing for every supply in the country.
But currently, that is one of the recommendations, is to chlorinate the whole country.
There is a recommendation for mandatory chlorination, but they do also discuss the what the threshold should be for any exemptions. And if you look at the Cabinet paper in response to that inquiry, which is where you have to look for what the government thinking is, they are asking for further advice on that. So they're not saying, okay, we're going to do this, tell us how we should do it. They're saying, give us further advice on the issue of mandatory chlorination.
So if you're going to go independent, then that flies in the face of 5.44, because if you went across even just all of Canterbury, which is one of the models, or 2/3 of the South Island, as Vicky called it, which is pretty close, then there's no point in treating them separately when they're all the same.
So at the moment around the country we already have shared services models and council-controlled organisations that deliver numerous water supplies. They don't all use the same treatment for the same source and community. So for some source waters and communities there will be one set of treatment processes. For a different source water, a different reticulation in a different community, they will use another approach, because the type of treatment that you use and the system of barriers that you need depends on the quality of your source water and then the quality of your reticulation. Right. So just because you have one organisation delivering multiple community supplies doesn't mean that you do exactly the same treatment system for those supplies. So the governance and management arrangements are different to the technical treatment arrangements. And
just my final question then is, if this model is to come in, or something similar to, because I know it's been discussed at Mayoral Forum and so on and so forth, given we're still some form of a democracy, will the people actually have the option to have a say on it? Not just a consultation, but will there be an actual vote where the people of Christchurch can say, you know what, we want to be completely independent, drink our own water, treat our own water the way we want to treat it, or not? And that's a question for the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta and David Clark.
So, if I may, I ran Internal Affairs this morning because I was concerned about that. I think it's important that we understand what's going on, but I won't if you don't want me to.
Okay, there'll be the opportunity to talk about the conversation you had with Internal Affairs during debate if you wanted to. I'll come to a question from Dion. Well, actually, I think my question's following on. I've got similar concerns, and the
in 5.43, you mentioned that in this report, it states that the principle of public ownership of existing infrastructure will underpin the reforms that the local government will, and that local government will continue to be involved in the considerations of the new models. But then in 5.44, it says current examples in New Zealand are Watercare in Auckland and Wellington Water, which are companies. Yes, their shareholders are councils, but they have independent boards. So the worry that I have and the question that I have is this, or do you see what they're proposing and what you've written in these 2 points, is that actually a company will dictate to councils what's going to happen, and then that councils and public people, such as all the ratepayers, will have to pay for it?
I think there are a lot of conversations that will be taking place between local government and central government before any of this is put in place.
But do you think from, I mean, that's I'm reading between the lines of what's been written in our report that people can see.
Can I just say, I don't think that's fair to ask our staff what government might be thinking and what the implications of that will be. But Helen's right in that there needs to be a whole lot of conversations with central government. They may well come and dictate what happens. They may not.
It's quite revolting.
Yeah, I mean, this is all a matter for government.
Yeah, I think that's part of your debate is that, but I think asking our staff.
No, I mean, I'm just asking because it's been written in this report.
Yeah,
so I just wanted to get a bit of clarification around that.
What it's doing is quoting the Minister and the review so far from the DIA. It's alerting you to that.
Yeah,
it is.
So these paragraphs really are just stating the situation as it currently stands. Obviously, there's some decision making that needs to occur within government. We would hope that local government would have some influence over that decision making. To what extent that'll be the case remains to be seen. But I mean, certainly the Minister has made some comments, not least at the recent Local Government New Zealand conference here in Christchurch, that suggest quite strongly what her view might be.
And we will continue to speak with the staff from Department of Internal Affairs and from the Ministry of Health and make sure they understand the situation here in Christchurch and what we're doing.
So you are aware of that and are quite strong on the opinion.
And there are two different conversations, of course, one of which is an officials to officials conversation and the other of which is a political conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. Are there any further questions on the report as it's in front of us today? Mike.
Yeah, I had several questions, Andrew.
And then I'll come to Yanni. Yep, Mike.
Thank you.
That's similar to the costs at the Gardeners Pump Station, yes. So that was for developing new wells. So there's quite a lot of more work in developing a new well than there is in remediating an existing well.
Okay. And the other one, on 5.10, you talk about that the northwest zone will soon be at 64%. So is there a point in time where that zone can be at 100% for the rest of the city? And if so, do you know when that roughly will be?
Yes, the northwest zone is likely to be at 100% before the rest of the city. Do I have a timetable for when it's likely to be? No, I don't. We're doing some further modelling work, and particularly around that step testing of the pump stations to see if we can deliver more water from the secure pump stations. So until we've done that modelling work, we can't really set out the timelines for it.
Do you have a rough idea, therefore, when we'd get a better idea of the timeline for the northwest zone?
We should have that in the October report.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you. Yanni, we'll come to your questions.
Great, thank you. I put a number of questions through to the briefing which I haven't received responses back on, so I'll get to those in a minute. But at a very high level, I've also circulated a paper that was written post-earthquake, and it was basically around looking at having smaller water supply zones, and I just wondered if the staff could just give us some sense of our current water supply strategy and how the work is related to the strategic approach that we're taking as a city, because I don't see reference to our water supply strategy in this report. I don't see reference to the document or the report that was written by staff and I think a consultant post-earthquake around moving towards smaller water supply zones. So I'd be really interested to know, from that wider strategic point of view, how the work that is being proposed and is being done fits into that. Thank you. That's the first question.
We are doing quite a bit of work around downstream effect from wellheads, really. The work that Helen's doing is around wellheads, and we're now looking at reticulation, particularly if you have a look at the report that got presented giving the European or the Dutch and the German experience, showing the low levels of leakage from their network compared to our own. We believe that if we go down that track might lead us into an ability to isolate zones and also better measure flow going in and out of those zones so that we can get a far more accurate. That's a piece of work that's being done at the moment. It's quite difficult for us to come up, however, with a strategic document when there's so much unknown up in the air with central government. Now, we believe that there may be a report back to Cabinet in August, there might be another one in September, and there may be a follow-up report in October, but really the main decisions we don't think will happen until the middle of next year, potentially. But we are doing some work around that and around our strategy, around zoning, around our reticulation, around, you will have recognised we're doing a bit of work around pressure zones as well, which all feed in to that same picture. So there is work being done on that. However, we're not in a position really to recommend anything because we're such in a state of flux at the moment.
So just in terms of the work that we're currently doing, have we looked at where it's logical, if we wanted to go to smaller water supply zones, installing the equipment at the same time, rather than having to come back and spend more money on contractors and consultants further down the track?
The work we're doing on wellheads doesn't really affect the way we zone manage our supply, and as Helen says, we're doing quite a lot of modelling through our network, and the zones change depending on the time of the day and the time of the year, and basically whether you've got big industries. You know, a good example would be industry pulls a lot of water from 8 till maybe 5 or even longer than that during the day. Households pull a lot of water during early morning and night, and so the zones are shifting. We're doing a lot of modelling around exactly where that water flows, but I couldn't guarantee anyone who and where they got their water from, but the management of the zones is almost, well, is work that's independent of the work that we're doing on the wellheads at this stage.
Thank you. And just the final question related to the water supply strategy is, it was supposed to be reviewed in 2014. I don't believe it has been reviewed. Can you just advise where the current review is at, if it's been commenced, what the timeframe is for that?
So we do have a working draft of the integrated water strategy, which takes into, well, it combines the wastewater strategy, the water supply strategy and the surface water strategy that we currently have as 3 separate documents. That draft has been on hold while we've been working with Ngāi Tahu over the stormwater consent. Now that the stormwater consent is back on track, if you like, and has been it's been relodged, hasn't it, and notified again with Environment Canterbury, we've picked up that draft and we're arranging workshops with the local iwi groups, and that will come up to council. As part of that, we will then have a water supply implementation plan, and we've begun work on that already, so that will be part of that water supply strategy.
So is it correct to say that it will be 10 years since we've reviewed it by the time we get around to reviewing it?
Sorry, I'm not sure what the original date was, but we've been doing quite a lot of work, obviously, around earthquake damage that we've had and state of flux. As Helen says, the comprehensive stormwater consent has probably been in train for the last 4 years, so it's a significant piece of work, as has the new regional land and water plan, which has also had quite a big impact, not only on our stormwater consent, but the way we will manage all of our surface water issues. So there has been work been going on in the background, but yes, it hasn't really surfaced at this point at a council level, because basically we're still pulling all the threads together to actually give you that integrated approach. And we believe an integrated approach is the right way to go, because they have all got interrelationships with each other.
Okay, thank you. Now, just the specific questions that I put through to the briefing as well, are you able just to respond to those, or would you like me to go through them again so you've got them?
So there are questions that have been put through as written questions. Is that right, Yanni?
Yes, correct.
Yep. And have you received a response to those?
No, I have not.
You haven't?
So just, I mean, I'll just go through them. They're pretty quick, but one was just, I know that Selwyn and Waimak councils obviously have water supplies signed off as secure by the DWA, and I was just wondering what examination we've given to the assessment that's been done of their wellheads and who their contractors are, and whether there's anything that we can learn from what they're doing.
We are certainly working with our consultants and contractors and looking at the experience in other local authorities. In particular, we're looking at Napier. I'm not aware that we've specifically looked at Selwyn and Waimak, but certainly we are looking at Napier, where they have a similar secure groundwater supply and have not been chlorinating that supply in the past. So yes, we are learning from other territorial authorities.
Okay, and are we, I mean, do we have any sense of that we're being treated the same as they have in terms of the assessment by the engineers, in terms of the standard of our wellheads?
My impression is that the engineers right across the country have a very similar interpretation. You will appreciate we got the assessment of our wellheads peer reviewed, and there was slightly changed, but we did look at that. So we believe that engineers right across the country are really interpreting the drinking water standards to the same, reasonably same level, which is a marked shift from where it was probably 12 months ago. There's also obviously a shift where we could do work in an improvement plan, and that was fine. There was an improvement plan as was raised by earlier in the discussion, but that's now, we have to deliver that plan, and that's really what Helen's doing, and you have fast tracked through the LTP.
Okay, and just two final questions. One is, what confidence can we have in City Care doing further work, given that they were involved in the ongoing maintenance of the wellheads? That is part of the reason why we got to this situation?
I don't think that that's a fair analysis of maybe the situation. However, we are working very closely with City Care in partnership to make sure that what we have got in our maintenance contracts gets delivered, gets monitored. They've got a whole range of online systems that we are now looking at. They're doing regular monitoring of all the chlorination, all the temporary works. So it'd be fair to say that the water staff are working in close partnership with City Care at the moment to deliver the outcome that we are expecting.
Right, and we have confidence in City Care?
We've got a contract with them that we need to maintain, so we are looking and ensuring that we're getting what we're asking to be delivered to a quality that we are being delivered, so that is occurring.
Right, and just the final question was in regards to just the social and the community initiatives. Have we done any more work on the distribution of water filters, filling containers from service centres at libraries, and also a map and a location of collection points for non-chlorinated water? I just don't see much consideration of the social and health impacts around the chlorination in our communities, and I just wondered if there's been any progress in regards to those issues that have previously been raised, but I haven't seen much progress.
We have expanded the information available to the general public, so the website has been upgraded and expanded. We now have a map that shows clearly where the chlorination has been reduced or removed right across the city, and we're getting very high counts of people going to see that map, and we're also distributing that information through social media. So there is certainly anecdotally, a lot of social connection across the city where people are going to collect their water from someone else's house if they're close to a pump station that still has chlorine and they have friends who do not. So I think that as we reduce the chlorine levels across the city, there is much less of a problem with that. And certainly the number of taste and odour complaints has dropped dramatically. So we have much fewer complaints across the city now.
Right, so just so I'm clear, we are not going to do any work around providing a location for people to get untreated, non-chlorinated water.
We certainly
that works nothing.
We haven't designated a tap where you can drive up, but there's very clear
Right.
information showing where the pump stations are that have no chlorine.
But people can't just walk up and access that, can they? They have to know someone in the area. They have to hope that that person's not connected to another water supply that is getting chlorine. Yeah, maybe we could get some more information back on that. But, you know, I guess I am a little bit frustrated that this has repeatedly been raised, have been told that this has been worked on, and we don't see any progress.
There have been a number of
But
reports.
I'm happy to say...
Sorry, there has been a number of reports gone up to council around the issues of supplying that water, but we are still working on some of it. You did also raise the issue about filters, and I might just ask Ross, because we have, you know, you put a filter in, it still needs to be maintained, and so that's one of the real issues about getting that information as part of our network as well, so that you actually, just because you put a filter in doesn't necessarily mean it's going to last forever, and so there are certain quantity of water, because we did look at that at one stage of putting filters in, and we did provide you with a memo about filters into some of our libraries, but the costs and the maintenance and the need to get industrial size filters was just going to be pretty horrific.
All right,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Yanni, that's everything from you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Sarah.
Thank you. Just two things, one on the report and one actually, I'd just like you to, if you're able to comment on the copper-silver ionisation option presented by the deputation today.
We'll have a look at that. I have two comments. One is that we are looking at minimising chemical treatment. So that is an alternative chemical treatment rather than having either no treatment or something like ultraviolet, which has no residual. So that would put a residual into the reticulation. And copper and silver levels are controlled through the New Zealand drinking water standards. My understanding of the levels that are required for disinfection are that they're below the maximum acceptable value, so it would comply with that. But we would also need to look at making sure that any new and innovative treatment that isn't listed in the drinking water standards is accepted by the drinking water assessor and the medical officer of health, and that might be quite a process, as well as looking at the costs. Copper and silver are not cheap.
Okay, thanks. So back to the report. So we've got, by the end of the month, hopefully 24% of the water being untreated.
It would be at least 24%. So when we do the percentages for you, what we're doing is we're looking at what it would be looking over a whole year.
Yep.
So in the winter time, it'll be much greater because
Yep.
we'll favour those pump stations.
Yep. And 5% sort of to start with anyway.
Yes.
Because there were some that didn't need the chlorination to start with.
That's correct.
So we'll have a number of pumps where we installed what turned out to be relatively expensive temporary chlorination equipment that has ended up being used for only a couple of months, or so maybe for some of them less than 4 months. And I'm wondering how much we've ended up spending on temporary equipment that actually hasn't been used for very long.
So that equipment isn't being discarded.
No.
So that equipment is being cleaned down and held for if it may be needed over the summer period, or if it may be needed in another application.
Okay, yeah. But at this point we've had chlorination in some of the pumps for a very short period of time, and when, as Raf was pointing out earlier, the risk actually hadn't changed at all since the paperwork had changed.
That's correct. So temporary chlorination has been an expensive exercise, and there's no evidence that we've got improved public health outcomes from it.
That's right.
Thank you. Any further questions? Jimmy.
I'm concerned is regarding to the water conservation campaign, because based on information, but I didn't see any incentive scheme, whether can encourage people fully understand a moment is a kind of the extraordinary time period, whether each one like to really need to save in the water consumption. I didn't see any kind of the scheme for the incentive.
So we haven't yet scoped what the water conservation campaign will be over the summer. What we're doing is saying that if we want to continue with works through the summer period, we will need an effective water conservation campaign, and we're going to start by doing a survey to determine what the appetite for a water conservation campaign would be and what types of measures people would be happy to roll out across the city. So we'd like to do that work first and then put in place a water conservation campaign over that summer period.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, back to you.
And just on that, the framing of that's going to be really important, because of course we're going to have a whole section of the city who won't see as much of a reason to do it because they'll have an unchlorinated water supply. And so actually the framing around that will be, I think, quite important as, for the good of the city, because many people will be unchlorinated by then.
That's correct. The sad news for the people who will be unchlorinated by then is that if the demand goes up right across the city, then we'll be pushing water across the city. That
so I think framing that really clearly will be really important, getting the information across.
All right, Aaron, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's just in addition to that, around that messaging, and that is that Christchurch sees itself as quite an environmentally friendly place. Yet last summer, on the first weekend of December, we used the most water in the world per person, and we need to be. I don't think we're aware enough of that. We don't look at that. We don't look at how much water that is. Like 650 litres of water for every single person in the city in a day is an incredible amount when it's drinking water quality. It's bottled water quality.
So this is leading to a question?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. We're done with questions, yep? Okay, great. So can I have a mover for so Vicky?
No, I want to move an additional motion.
Right, so you want to move what's in front of us with an additional motion attached as well?
Yeah, if you could put it up.
Yep, thank you. So make it very clear to the Department of Internal Affairs that the Council is totally opposed to being part of a water company or authority which goes beyond Christchurch City and means that water is not a function of a directly elected authority, and our residents have been required to pay for the cost of remediation, drinking water, stormwater or wastewater for rural and small urban authorities in the South Island.
So where will that come from? Officials or governance?
Sorry?
Officials or governance, making it very clear.
I think governance.
Yep.
Do we ask the Mayor to write a letter perhaps to the Department of Regional
No,
Affairs?
I think I've actually invited, if I may speak now.
Yep, so we've got a mover for this, Vicky. Have we got a seconder, Dion? Okay, so Vicky, you're indicating you'd like to engage in debate.
Yes,
Great.
I would. Just in relation to, and I realise I've got a short time, so I just want to focus on that part that is around 5.44 and 5.55 and 5.46, which talks about changes in the way in which the three waters are managed. And if you read through the Internal Affairs Department documents that sit with it and the Minister's speeches, it is absolutely clear that they are faced with major issues in relation to the quality of drinking water, stormwater and wastewater in local authorities across the country, especially small local authorities. And when you read their papers, it looks as though let's solve that by making much larger areas for those three water authorities, and actually making sure that the cities pay for the rural wastewater, stormwater and drinking water, where they have very few staff, very few resources, and in the South Island, especially around Canterbury, very major problems. So we're sorting out our water, making sure that all aspects of it are at the highest possible standard. And then post-October this year, there are two things coming to Cabinet. One is the regulatory, and then there is this structure that is being created. If you look at our budget from last year, 40% of our OPEX goes into water, wastewater, stormwater. So if you take that out of the Christchurch City Council, you actually decimate a huge chunk of what we do. Of our CapEx, it's slightly less, it's 28%, and overall, of our budget, 34.25% this year goes into those three waters. That is a massive chunk of this council. No matter what happens in water, the people of Christchurch, who have a very strong emotional attachment to all aspects of water, need to be able to go to a directly elected authority, not a company that we've appointed, not a regional authority, not a standalone thing, no company, nothing. It needs to be a directly elected authority to which they can go and tell the fact that they are angry or happy or whatever. So what we are getting into with this suggestion, and I mean the two suggestions that you've got in front of you are for, and these are not definite yet, but I think we need to be very clear about where we stand. I spoke to the Department of Internal Affairs this morning and have invited him to come and speak to all councillors because we haven't all had the same information at the same time. So he's organising that through the Mayor's Department now, and I think that's really important. But if we are going to take, you know that what's coming at the smaller rural authorities who have had massive issues with water, who have major lakes to sort out, the point of what this is, and you don't need to read between the lines, it's actually in the lines of the documents from a DIA, is that that cost will be shared by the city. So bad news, Christchurch ratepayers, because you've got an earthquake and the government promised that they would bring you back up to speed and they forgot to do that. And then you've got an issue of small rural authorities who can't actually deal with this problem. And so bad news, Christchurch residents and ratepayers, you get to pay for that as well. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not okay. The cost of actually fixing the drinking water throughout New Zealand, as I understand it, is about the cost of Transmission Gully. So the government actually needs to decide which is more important, water or roading. And so I don't think it's fair for them to say, Christchurch City ratepayers, you've just fixed your own water at quite major cost, and now, good news, you get to fix Kaikoura, West Coast, Nelson, Marlborough, Hurunui, Selwyn, Waimak as well, who we know have major problems. So I think we need to be very clear about this, and I know this is only part of the water issue, but there's so many parts of it at the moment. I just want to focus on this one. And I think we need to make it absolutely clear to the Department of Internal Affairs that they need to start looking for other alternatives. One simple one would be that they could actually take the GST on rates, which I don't even think is, I think it's marginally legal, and actually apply that to sorting out water, stormwater and wastewater throughout the country. But they have not considered those options, they've only considered these sort of options. So I think we need to be very clear up front that we're standing up for the people of Christchurch in terms of what we're prepared to pay and what we're prepared to do, and just so that there's no ambiguity about it whatsoever.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. I support Vicky's comments wholeheartedly. Thank you, Helen, and team for your update. And in the recommendation where it talks about best endeavours, undertaking that work there, I was at the Minister's, or attended the Minister's speech rather, at the LGNZ conference. She said many things, one of which was any solution must fit our context. She said that herself in the context of having been to the UK, coming back here, but in New Zealand, she didn't specify whether it was a New Zealand-wide or local context, but one thing about our context is that we're big on is self-determination, which Vicky has just touched on, and to me that extends to every TA in the country. So context for me is the question with regard to our alpine-fed water, our very good testing regime. I had a conversation with a long-standing councillor of 8 terms, 24 years. Did you ever have any outbreaks? He said the worst, I think we had a mouse somewhere in the system in Riccarton, but it wasn't a big drama, it was quickly overcome. So we haven't had any health outbreaks from our water system. We've had the odd E. coli transgression. One thing we do have in terms of context too is a good functional relationship with our regional council. One of the factors identified in the Havelock North inquiries that sat behind the outbreak up there, and the fact that it could have been prevented if some of those relationships were better and they'd been more proactive. For me, this is looming larger than it's about us being or becoming even more risk averse as a country. Is it about chlorinating the water, or is it about becoming more risk averse? So I'm fully behind what Vicky is putting forward today. I pick up Raf's point that something changed between August and December, but it wasn't the water, it was the goalposts on wheels, and they started shifting out of everyone's reach. I'm looking forward with my colleagues to becoming chlorine free again. I'd like to thank Helen again for all the work that her and the staff are doing.
Thank you. Dion and then Pauline. Dion.
I just wanted to echo what was said by Councillor Buck as well. My real concern, and actually I'll come back to the concern that I have, I just wanted to say thank you to the work that is being done as well, echoing the words Glenn was saying. And I think we should be celebrating some of the work that's happened and been accelerated, because it is pretty difficult from some of these reports, if you read them, how complex some of the work is. But I am concerned that the goalposts will continue to move. And I am concerned that in this report we have 2 paragraphs that actually talk about specifically what's going to happen next, and we have no control over that under the work we're doing at the moment. So my concern is that we're doing all this work at the moment, and actually the goalposts will further change. And then the goalposts will further change when we have to start paying for, or the public starts having to pay for work that somebody independent tells us to do. And then the city ratepayers and right throughout the whole country don't actually have any control over that. And that's a big concern, and which is why I support the additional amendment that's been put forward, because we do need to say that people who pay this work to be done actually should have some sort of say in this, because it is going to cost a lot of money, it is going to be difficult, and we do have good different circumstances here around the supply of our water, which comes from under the ground. I mean, I find it ridiculous how much water, you know, and on the west coast they get 6 metres of water a year. You could just open your mouth when it rains and you get all the water you want, but they'll be put under the same rules and regulations that we do here and other places. I mean, you could just go down to a river, get some water and drink it. Are they going to start sort of regulating rivers? So I mean, it's going to be a very interesting time moving forward, but thank you for the work that you have done. And I do think that moving forward we are going to, as a council, have to have conversations, because in this report it does explicitly say that that 12-month time frame in the January resolution will probably not be able to be met. So I think we are going to need to have some conversation very soon about how we manage that and what we actually do and what we say to our communities.
Pauline and then Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that we're going to meet the deadline come hell or high water. Helen Highwater. I'd also like to congratulate Helen on this amazing report, and as Dion has said, it's incredibly complex. We've been all over this for many months now, and it's still very difficult to get your head around the many facets of this situation, and it's ever changing along with those goalposts. But look, you know, basically, you know, Christchurch Council has chosen to be proactive, and we've jumped in our upgrading program in our response to the learnings from Havelock North. So we've chosen to treat this as a learning situation, and you know, I think it's big ups for that. We've opted to spend millions and millions of dollars. None of that is being wasted, no matter what happens in the future. So it's a very fine balancing act, knowing where and how to spend that money, and congratulations again for handling that very well. And we know that by the end of this month, 24% of our water will have no chlorine in it. I mean, that's fantastic. And a reduction of the dose by half, which is awesome. We're also looking at, we're running a parallel program with short term to get that chlorine out, and a long term to ensure that our infrastructure is robust and best practice. And I love what you said, Helen, about we're planning and we're doing at the same time. We see the report on the Dutch practices, which are being hailed as best practice. If we follow down that path, which I hope that we do, we could be facing some increased costs for delivery. But I certainly will not be supporting any government mandate for Christchurch to be financially supporting other TAs and their affordability of delivery and upgrading their three waters. We're doing all we can ourselves, spending millions of dollars to assure ourselves and our residents that we believe our systems are secure. And the government should and could look for other ways to support our surrounding TAs rather than leaning on us to support them. We won't be the financial winners out of that one, and we do risk losing control of our water. We've had the earthquakes, floods, the fire, and now the chlorination, all costing millions, if not billions, of our ratepayer dollars. This is significant for Christchurch, and our water is our #1 priority. And I still believe that because we're blessed with our good, pure groundwater, not everyone has the opportunity to have groundwater to drink. A lot of places have to drink surface water, which is far riskier, and sometimes recycled and treated water. So we are special. And also we're special because we have the expertise and the will to demonstrate the safety of our drinking water. And we do need to drill down into that, excuse the pun, into that term public ownership. What does that really mean, and what are the risks that belie that? So Christchurch and this council, I believe, is ready to stand firm and protect our pure resource of our deep aquifer drinking water, and to be able to access that in its pure state, untreated. And it is frustrating for us waiting for the government reports and announcements and requirements, and it is having an impact on our own planning. However, I acknowledge again and commend Helen and her team for managing this, and to plan and do at the same time, and ensuring that the money we're spending is well spent and not compromised in the future. And to address Aaron's issue about our high water consumption, we do have to remind ourselves that we are the Garden City, and we do make a lot of beer, and we do drink more beer in the summer. Therefore, it is why we do use more water in the summer. So the conservation call for residents will be a very interesting one. If it's gardeners, they need to start now by looking at mulching, so you don't need so much water. So we need to get onto that pronto. So I will also be supporting the additional amendment with the substantive. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Sarah, Aaron and Phil. Sarah.
Thank you. And I completely agree that it's unacceptable that our water supply would be amalgamated with other regions, and disingenuous to say that it would be publicly owned when it's clear that it wouldn't be democratically governed. But right here, right now in Christchurch, I have a real issue with the amount of money and time and staff resources being spent on the temporary chlorination for such a short time frame, when it's clear that there's been no measurable public health benefit for that, and when those many millions of dollars could have been spent instead, and that time and energy focused on actually repairing the infrastructure that needed it to start with. I think that's would have been a much better place for our time and energy and staff resources and ratepayers' money to be spent, would have been to getting straight into that work, rather than spending months looking at how to temporary chlorinate when much of it has only been used for such a short amount of time. We need to get the chlorine out of our water. There has been no increased public health risk. Nothing had changed. We need to spend that money on getting our infrastructure up to standard, not just good enough to get rid of the chlorine, but we need it to be good enough to meet any new standards that the government has, and that includes our reticulation system, which is a key component. Havelock North was not about wellheads, it was about the aquifer, and we completely overreacted.
Aaron and then Phil. Aaron.
Cool. I'd firstly like to thank and congratulate the Crusaders for winning on the weekend, even though they were drinking chlorinated water. And just to clarify one thing, beer takes 61 to 180 litres of water to make 1 litre of beer, so that could mean that everyone in Christchurch is drinking approximately 5 litres of beer a day in summer. Just saying, that's Ireland. I just want to raise one point based on the addition that's been made, and that is around the minister that is leading the charge on this, or is in charge of this, around water, having visited the UK, and the UK has one controlling authority for water across the whole country, so not a great model in my book, and they chlorinate across the whole country and England, so not the best model to look at. I'd be a lot happier if she went to the Netherlands. And then finally, just that people should get a vote. If there is going to be permanent chlorination to any parts of New Zealand that don't already have it, the people, the public in those areas should get to vote. Otherwise, there is no mandate to permanently chlorinate their water, I believe, in a democracy. It's such a massive change to our country and our way of life, especially in this city, that the people should get a vote, not a consultation.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. I'm going to support the amendments, the additional recommendations there. I think it is important to send a signal to the DIA and to government that, in fact, a future company approach just isn't on. Clearly, that there is an indication around that it would remain in public ownership, and this government, I'm sure, would intend to do that. It doesn't mean that something that would be in public ownership in the future by way of an amalgamated authority would not be privatised later on by another government. So, however, I think that the important parts to this report too are that the developing information which we have received in terms of the different treatments that are going to be available, and that's what's been really valuable for us as a council. And we're going to get further advice too around some of the other treatments. And like clearly that I'll be certainly very interested, as I indicated, to look at the ultraviolet treatment and how effective and cost effective that will be. I think it's clear from this report that in fact, chlorine isn't the only tool in the toolbox. It's one barrier. It isn't totally effective. And so we are going to have to look at other options, and they will come to us. So but I think it is fair at this stage to flag that our opposition to future water companies and having to pay for the costs for wider regions, when in fact our council are currently paying a huge amount of our capital project funding, as Vicky pointed out.
Tim and then Mike.
Thank you very much. I will absolutely support Vicky's amendment. I think it's a very good addition. But first of all, I'd like to thank Helen and Dave and their team for the work that they've done this report. But I guess that the key thing here is this city has been delivering clean drinking water to its residents well before we were required to add chlorine and change the wellheads and do other things to that. So I do want to congratulate our team and our staff for doing that for many, many years. With regards to the slideshow that was the Three Waters review, which was the New Zealand Government and Internal Affairs, on page 28, requires answering some tough questions. Some of these questions are: how do we ensure communities and visitors have access to safe and affordable drinking water? We were actually doing that before we were lumbered with the cost of chlorination. How much will it cost to meet national directions and community aspirations for fresh water? Again, we were doing that. You could argue that it's been expensive, that it's over a third of our rates going to the Three Waters, but water is absolutely crucial. The other part of that question, how do we meet national directions? Well, that's costing our ratepayers a fortune at the moment, but they are two very different things. How do we meet increasing community expectations relating to drinking water? Well, the expectation of drinking water from our ratepayers was it's clean and safe and obviously drinkable. We were meeting those. We've been meeting those for many, many years, and our staff's testing regime is well and truly above what was required by the national standard leading into this. So how can you raise an expectation when it is a really simple expectation of clean and safe drinking water? The other question, how can communities with small or declining rates base fund renewals of ageing infrastructure? And this is around drinking water. That's not a question for the ratepayers of Christchurch, who are being stretched at 5.5% of rates at the moment. That is a question that those communities must ask their elected members and their officials and then government. That's not a question for the ratepayers of Christchurch. So as I said, I will be absolutely supporting this, and I hope this is going to send a very clear message to those in internal affairs in the government. Thank you.
Okay, and finally coming to Mike.
Thank you. While I voted against chlorinating our water back in January, I'd like to acknowledge the work that staff has done to try and get our water back to being untreated as quickly as possible. You know, it's not surprising, but it is, I guess, disappointing to hear that there's actually been no public health benefit from the temporary chlorination of our drinking water, and it has come at great expense. At a time where, you know, we see what's happening with central government, where they're heading, all our money needs to be put in to our drinking water infrastructure to make sure that we do get an exemption. You know, the alarm bells have been ringing for some time with what's happening centrally, and those bells are getting louder and louder. It's absolutely shocking to see the prospect that the ratepayers of Christchurch may have to start being responsible for other regions around the South Island. It's absolutely abhorrent, and I will oppose it, and I support this resolution.
Thank you. Yanni's indicated that he'd like to speak to this as well. Yanni.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a question for the mover and the seconder, just based on the report that we've got. I really strongly support the amendment, was happy to third it, but I do wonder whether we should be also directing this to the Mayoral Forum and to Local Government New Zealand, and I just wondered whether we could include those two parties to it.
So we just add in some wording that reflects that? Yep, thank you.
That'd be great. And if I'll just talk to the amendment and the substantive at the same time.
What I'm going to do is just put, I mean, it was moved by Vicky, seconded by Dee on the whole lot, so I'm just going to put it as one motion.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So just in regards to the amendment first, and it's one resolution, but the amendment that was put forward as part of that, I do think it is really important to point out that, you know, this has been, as others have said, this has been a response to the Havelock North inquiry, and in some ways it has felt like it's been forced on us. But I think one of the points that the Mayor made in the previous debate, which I had a lot of sympathy for, was the fact that because we made the decision to put chlorine temporarily into our water, we are the ones that now have the decision about when we wish to remove it, and I think that's a really important point. If we've been forced to do it by the Medical Officer of Health, then that would have, as I understand it, been largely out of our control, and we could have been facing possibly a lot longer time frame for when we get to make get to remove chlorine from our water. So I think, you know, a number of councillors have referred to in the debate that this was forced on us. I think actually we did make the decision ourselves based on, you know, it was a pretty limited choice, but the Medical Officer of Health had indicated that they would serve notice on us if we didn't make that decision. But I think there has been some advantages to us making that decision, and that we get to control when we remove chlorine from our water, and then we see possibly what the consequences are. In regards to the amendment, it's really important that although there's been a lot of reference to Havelock North Inquiry, this started well before then. There's a move in New Zealand to basically do the same thing to water that was done to electricity. In fact, the Local Government New Zealand Funding Review Discussion document, I believe it was from 2015, and I quote it, says that basically examples in New Zealand of water, wastewater and waste management being provided under corporate structures, but these institutional structures have not been adopted uniformly across councils. And it goes on to say that they believe that public utility models mean there's clear separation between policy and regulatory functions and service delivery, and that model contrasts with the more traditional models of service delivery within local authorities, which tend to compromise effective service delivery through insufficient charges, soft budget constraints, weak efficiency incentives, and low accountability. And then it goes on to say that the gains for clearer accountability for service delivery and performance of the utility drives cost savings and improvements in service quality, and that those gains have been extensively documented following the corporatisation of the former electricity departments and power boards. So what we can see is from 2015, and I think even earlier, there's a move to privatise and corporatise water supply. It's a gold rush, and I think what's playing out in terms of Havelock North has been, that's really served as ammunition to further that aggressive charge towards privatising and corporatising our water. And for anyone to think that the electricity reforms have had any benefit for local people, local consumers, when we've seen costs go through the roof, we've seen huge chief executive pay packets on what is effectively monopolies delivering a basic service to people that should be a fundamental right. So I think we should be really concerned, and we need to make sure and be as proactive as possible in making our opposition to this known. And just finally, I do want to commend the staff for the work they've done around the wellheads and the pump stations, but I do think we're missing the big strategic piece of work around what we do in terms of water supply. We have a water supply strategy. Water conservation programs were supposed to be part of that. I'm not sure that they've really been funded adequately. They seem to be a soft touch in terms of the budget cuts. And so what we see through the LTP and the annual plan is that water conservation measures are not adopted in terms of our strategy because it's something that is not seen as a budget priority. Now we're in a situation where we're having to go back and really start ramping up those sorts of campaigns again. And personally, I think we need to urgently review that water supply strategy. The fact that we haven't reviewed it in 10 years, I think is a concern, particularly post-earthquake, where we want to have a greater resilience in our community. So I welcome the report today. Very happy to support the amendment. It's not a pleasant position for us to be in as a city, but the sooner we progress, the sooner we can take chlorine out of our water. Thank you.
Thank you. Raf.
I think just one thing I want to make clear around the chlorination is that it was a proactive move from council. We only did it because we had the medical officer of health breathing down our necks. We didn't have a concern about the water supply. It was a strategic decision knowing that if we did this for 12 months, we could address any particular wellheads that were of concern. But we were very clear we were only going to do this for 12 months. And I think the one thing missing in this report is that fact. There's an assumption actually that we may continue the chlorination beyond 12 months. I certainly don't hold that position. I'm not sure what the council's view is, but I think we need to actually have that in the conversation and not just assume we're going to move to conservation or switching off different pump stations. It's good work to be doing. The wellheads do need to be the best they can be, and it's difficult to talk about that because we haven't had the report back yet, the Robertson report, so it's difficult to know what the situation was that led to some of these issues. So I support the work that is being done, but I do want to make clear that I don't support chlorinating the water supply past next January. In terms of the amendment, I'm pretty agnostic about that. That's, I prefer to see a proposal before I make a decision on it, but I'm happy to support it today.
So just to wrap up, I mean, I'd certainly like to thank staff for what's a very detailed report and what clearly is a very large volume of work that's going on to lead to the outcomes that we've talked about this morning. Maximising the delivery of untreated water. It's great to see the amount of chlorine in the water being reduced and the amount of unchlorinated water coming into the network also been reduced and planned to be further reduced. Listening to the numbers, it's clear that this is a major programme of work. And I'm pleased to see that you are doing everything that you possibly can to look at different ways of speeding up the work programme with a clear focus on reducing and then removing the chlorine from the water supply as soon as possible. I guess these are exactly the conversations that we hope to be having, looking at all of the different ways that we could look at reducing and removing chlorine. And I'd reiterate the point that's been made. The original council resolution allows for chlorination of the water for 12 months. I'm pretty confident that we would not be looking at extending that 12-month chlorination period. Certainly my view is the chlorine was in there for 12 months. We do what we need to do within the 12 months, and then the chlorine comes out. I'm reasonably confident that that would be the view that we would take at that time, and therefore that's the context in which we're working. But we certainly look forward to the upcoming reports which have been signalled this morning. The UV treatment is certainly an area of interest and could well be quite a large part of the solution to all of this. And again, it's good that you're looking at all different ways of dealing with this and not just going straight to continued chlorination as the way that we need to deal with what we're looking at here. Now, on the additional resolutions that have been put by Vicky, seconded by Dion, ownership of the water supply is something that has been talked about, broadly for some time, and Yanni made the point that this conversation really predates Havelock North. And yeah, wrapping water up in a CCO or some other body which isn't necessarily governed by democratically elected people. Current government has got a commitment that water supply under whatever model would remain in public ownership. But of course, once you've created a CCO or some other vehicle, it's very easy under a different set of policies from a government which may not share that view, for that CCO then to be subject to privatisation, which would then see control of the water supply further removed from the people. And of course, ownership of water is something that I imagine would form quite a big part of that debate as well, particularly in New Zealand with the particular constitutional arrangements, the Treaty of Waitangi and so on that we've got here. We're very familiar as a territorial authority of what the cost of assuming the networks and the infrastructure of a small rural authority or small rural authorities would look like. There's significant contribution from Christchurch City Council into wastewater schemes in particular at the moment on Banks Peninsula. And like a number of other small rural authorities who have either chosen to underinvest or probably more likely haven't had the ability because of small populations to adequately invest in those water supply, wastewater, stormwater infrastructures, the city as a whole, with Banks Peninsula included, of course is now bearing the cost of wastewater improvements for Littleton Harbour, wastewater improvements for Akaroa Harbour. And I think it would be untenable for the people of the city to be expected to pay for those sort of infrastructure improvements across the whole of the north of the South Island or the whole of Canterbury or whatever it may be. So I'm also supportive of the additional resolutions that have been put as a result of the discussions that we've had today. We're in a position where we've got some significant expense as a city in dealing with what we need to do ourselves to look after our own residents within Christchurch City and Banks Peninsula, to have a further burden put onto us because of needing to look to support other rural authorities with small populations, and the lack of ability to pay for what we know is expensive infrastructure certainly isn't something that I would support. So I'm certainly pleased to support all of these resolutions today. So I'll put the Pauline.
Clarification, January is not the date. We didn't chlorinate till April, May.
All right, so I will now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. And thanks to staff for detailed answers to questions and detailed report. We'll now break for morning tea. It's 11:30. We'll come back at 11:40, so we'll take just 10 minutes for morning tea. And what I intend to do is to pick up the pace of the meeting from there. I'm keen to pick up the pace here. We'll need a quorum, so if we can grab some people so that we've got a quorum would be good. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Okay, so we'll call the meeting back to order. Next items, we've got 3 sets of minutes, items 5, 6 and 12. I'm happy to move those minutes. Do I have a seconder for them? Jamie Goff. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That's carried. Now moving to item 7, transfer of funding to VBase Limited. This came through the Finance and Performance Committee meeting. Tim, you're conflicted. We'll let you know when we've finished. And Raf, if you'd like to introduce this item, please.
Yep, this is just a technical cash flow transfer. VBase owns the town hall and so has used all the direct insurance proceeds and funds to do the repair to date. And this is council topping that up to the agreed budget via an equity transfer rather than debt funding. It's just much more tax efficient.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so Raf, you're happy to move this? Yeah, Dion, happy to second. All right, no questions? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? So Aaron voting against, and that's carried. Thank you. Next we move to the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee reports. So item 8, the Traffic and Parking Bylaw, administrative changes to Central City one-way streets. Pauline, if you'd like to make some comment on this.
Changes to one-way streets. The Issue Committee unanimously agreed to recommend that the Council approve these changes. It's changes to the designation of some of the one-way streets in the CBD. This dates back to the Canterbury Earthquake Authority making some changes to these in 2008. Basically, in readiness, how long been 2014, sorry about that. Basically in readiness to two-way. However, these anticipated changes have not materialised. In fact, we've got a budget in the LTP for conversions 24 and 25 years, and they're not likely to in the very near future. So in order to give clarity on the road designation and rules, it's wise to make these changes to revert back basically to the status quo. If for the future there's a decision to revisit these one-way streets, it would be appropriate to amend the bylaw again at that time. So this just makes them enforceable the way they are. So as I say, we've supported this and I'm happy to move it.
All right. Dion, you happy to second? No? Okay, so do we have a seconder? Tim? All right. Dion, you've got a question?
Specifically on Chewham and Litchfield Street. Actually, I'll back the bus up a little bit. This is changing the transport chapter of the Christchurch Central Recovery Plan. The Accessible City chapter? Is that effectively what these changes are going to do?
It's not necessarily changing it, but it's just really putting back into the bylaw what's currently there. So until such time as whatever decisions made on those, as those projects get taken further forward.
So would that then put these, would these changes make be in conflict with the Accessible City chapter in the Central City Recovery Plan?
No, because it did really just putting them back until such time as we develop we'll take further those designs as part of those programs later on in the LTP.
So it's not a deliberate change to the
No, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, we know that Litchfield Street and Chewham Street will happen at some stage soon because we've put the money in the budget to start the stadium or the multi-purpose arena, and that effectively goes over top of Litchfield Street. So why is the purpose of doing this now when we know that there's going to be an end outcome on Litchfield Street, which will change Chewham Street in the future anyway?
Yeah, so it's just about tidying up the bylaw and the schedules in the bylaw at the moment. Obviously with the development of the stadium, there was a better idea of how the roads interact with the stadium as part of that, and will be changed to whatever they need to be at that time.
Okay. If that's the case, Chewham Street and Litchfield Street, especially the intersection, especially the merge of the two-way into, the one-way into the two-way part on Chewham Street, and especially the Madras Street, Litchfield Street intersection, both heading east, are quite messy intersections in the central city. So if we're going to be amending these bylaws and putting them back to what they effectively were, are we going to be looking at tidying up those intersections from a safety perspective? Because that intersection of Madras and Litchfield Street's not very safe, and the on Chewham Street between Barbados and Fitzgerald, that merge lane is not very safe as well, because you often see people turning into the Mediterranean using that merge lane, and then I've seen quite often personally quite a lot of near accidents there. So I'm just wondering, if we're going to be doing this, are we going to be looking at addressing the safety concerns that I know about personally on those areas?
Yeah, so the part, this is around really aligned to where the funding sort of currently sits in the LTP, but yeah, we are aware of some of the issues around that Madras, Litchfield Street. We've been looking at doing some tidying up there to make it a little bit clearer, and the same thing on Chewham Street as well.
So there is some assurance that if we're going to be approving this, that those things will happen? Yeah,
but it'll be minor works just to try and make it clear, as to just start through our normal lines.
Yeah, I think they are minor, but they need to be done. Okay.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. Just curious, I know the option 1 says no financial implications, etc., and you've said in the report no costs given no works. My question though is, surely there must have been a cost somewhere in terms of at least opportunity cost or something, and I know these are future changes that were signalled when Sarah revoked the bylaw at the time, but surely there must have been a cost somewhere.
I guess that cost was the cost of implementation as well. There is no implementation. It's just about correcting the bylaw. So there's no physical work being done on the roads. That's where the nil comes from. Yeah.
There might have been a staff time cost.
Yeah, there's been a lot of time.
Yeah, have we got an actual figure on that?
If I can just comment, we have a standard clause in our reports where we assign $750 for preparation and investigation into any report of this type of nature.
Michael, so at the most it was probably that $250.
Sorry?
It was probably $250 at most then.
Possibly a minimal amount of money. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So this has been moved and seconded. Is there any debate on this? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, South Frame Laneways, item 9. Pauline, have you got some comments on this one?
Yes, so this is also part of the Central City Recovery Plan, and a recommendation from ITI. It's concerning the layout of the 6 new laneways that are all named in the report. There'll be shared zones operating under a 10k speed limit, which brings with it a shared zone, brings with it its own restricted parking rules. And the council today is required to give legal effect to the revised traffic controls. Report states that community consultation and engagement has taken place by Tākaro, and they've stated that the feedback was generally positive, with most property owners acknowledging the benefits of opening up these blocks into a new public realm. I think they're looking really good. So approving this recommendation shows consistency also with our Streets and Spaces Design Guide and the CCRP. It'll then allow for any required enforcement, should it be necessary, once the appropriate signage has been installed. So I'm happy to move this, and the committee was supportive.
Okay, so moved by Pauline, seconded by Mike. Are there any questions on this?
Yes, just I've got one, Andrew.
Yep, go ahead.
Right, just in regards to the report, it makes reference in a number of places 5.14 and there's other parts of the report. It makes reference to this being done for pedestrian and also cycling activity and priority. And I just wondered whether we have any safety audit around the ability for people to cycle through these laneways. Because it would seem to me that they're not the sort of places we want to be encouraging cycling activity. And I just wanted to check whether we really want people cycling through these laneways.
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, all of the South Rome laneways and including their connections to the adjacent street networks, that's primarily Chewham and St Asaph streets to the north and south of this area. All of those laneways and the development of the designs have been safety audited at the various stages. The whole principle of the design of them is to enable shared space between cyclists, pedestrians and legitimate servicing vehicles, which we expect there to be there for a limited amount of time in order to service the mixed-use developments within it. The signage supports that, and so the whole principle of the thing is to actually enable cyclists and pedestrians to access that area, to access those premises, and to do so in a safe manner.
And just to be clear, the speed restrictions will apply to the cyclists as well?
Yes.
Right. And how is that enforced?
Primarily enforced through the design of the laneways themselves. Those parts of the laneways where we're not expecting vehicular traffic to be there, effectively it is very difficult for a motorised vehicle to enter those. The remaining laneways that are primarily before council this morning, the design of them lends itself to a low-speed shared space environment. Our hope would be that that is broadly a very self-explaining and therefore self-enforcing lower speed environment, but the resolutions before council this morning would enable council officers to enforce that speed limit if it was deemed to be necessary.
Right. And just a final question. I understand there's been some concern with the eastern frame, and just I don't know whether there's been any feedback or safety auditing of the pathways through there, but just the combination of cycling, pedestrian, cars. Is there any ongoing program of just monitoring the design and ensuring that if there are any safety things that they're addressed?
Yes, absolutely, through you, Mr. Chairman. Most of these schemes are subject to post-construction safety audits. The laneways network in the central city is new, and drivers are and road users are getting used to that environment now, and so with these new laneways there is a need for us to continue to monitor them. As far as the east frame is concerned, some of those laneways through the east frame are not yet complete at the present time, so you'll still see some bollards there at the moment, while some of those sections of laneway continue to be vested by Otakaro with council as legal road, and so yeah, we will continue to monitor those, particularly from the point of view of safety.
Great, thank you. So Sarah, and then back to Dion. Sarah, you all right, Dion?
A question on this one is the example that's happened outside the terraces. We did use that shared zone sign with the cars in it. We ended up having just cars, and they were driving down Cashel Street, and it didn't really work that well. And now we've just taken that sign down and put the just authorised vehicles only sign there. Are we going to? Well, what mitigations have been done to avoid rat running? Is my big question here between Chewham Street and St Asaph, and for people to avoid the main arterial or the main roads?
That is again primarily through the layout of the laneway network there. Because of the 10km/h speed limit, which will be enforceable within it, because of the nature of the fact that any driver coming through there should be expecting to meet pedestrians, cyclists, and in increasing numbers as those developments take place there. Generally, it will be an unattractive shortcut for motorists through those laneways. It's not going to be made easy for them to drive through there. The reason we're permitting vehicles in there is for legitimate servicing to the premises. But with what we will be doing in monitoring the usage, as I've just said, is if we begin to believe that vehicles are running through there, then we would have some ability to begin to look at the design, the placement of street furniture and so on to deter that.
So are there any ways we can, because obviously we don't want cars just driving through there, just for the sake of cars driving through there to rat run between St. Asaph Street and Chilham Street, which is already happening. I've seen the police do it even, outside the Justice and Emergency Precinct. So how can we, is there any signage that we can use to say, actually, we just want service vehicles to go in these laneways rather than just cars?
Those are the resolutions before council this morning.
But the signs don't
it does make clear that it is for legitimate servicing vehicles, and that is pretty much the environment that exists on Oxford Terrace, which you referred to. The resolutions before council this morning enable council enforcement staff to enforce that. And so, yes, there would be further tools before council if we felt we needed to recommend to you additional enforcement on those laneways, then we could come back to council as a result of that monitoring and recommend to you further traffic resolutions if we deem to them to be necessary. Our hope is that we won't.
Thank you. Jimmy.
Okay. One question regarding to attachment B, particular consultation with those key stakeholders. What is the result? What's their response?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in the Otakaro letter, the response to most of these proposed resolutions and traffic operations there was broadly positive from those directly affected landholders and businesses and so on. And of course it's also important to bear in mind that the laneway network has been developed under the South Frame planning framework, so those developers and those landowners within that area understand what the purpose of the laneway network is, and so these are just merely the traffic measures to enable us to enforce that. So the general response has been broadly positive to the way these are planned to be operated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this has been moved and seconded. Is there any debate on this? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. And then the next one, item 10, the July 2017 Christchurch post-event, flood post-event report. And again, Pauline, your introduction of this one, please.
Yes, well, this is in response to a previous council resolution requesting that the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee seek a report reviewing the July 2017 Heathcote River catchment and Banks Peninsula flood event and the interventions to prevent the sewage overflows. Now, the report is attached, so I'll take it as read, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but the main points is that overall the EOC response was believed to have gone well, and they say that the communications were good, noting that there is a key opportunity to identify and train further staff to fulfil key EOC functions, noting also that some increased resourcing is required. 4.5 is actions taken to prevent sewage overflows resulting from a detailed wet weather plan. These consist of deploying of overpumps prior to an event, deploying of sucker trucks during an event, use of signage advising people if there is an overflow, and prompt responses to calls from the community. 4.8, preventing river floodwater from entering the wastewater network. Actions include installation of vent plugs at vented manholes, installation of manhole flood trays, and installation of non-return valves. That's stopping the water to backflow. I think the report's good. It's got attached maps which identify the properties that were affected by the flooding. They identify named personnel who were part of the EOC centre, and they and the table attached noting issues, the actions and the outcomes. I think this is a really good, clear report. I know that councillors will note some of the identified, I won't say shortcomings, but perhaps areas where there could be some attention for a future event. But if we don't do these reports and identify those, we can't learn from them and grow. So we're basically just receiving this report today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this? Okay, we don't have staff here at the moment, so what I propose we do is we get staff to join us. We'll leapfrog to the next item, which is the Banks Peninsula, the Pest-Free Banks Peninsula Memorandum of Understanding, and then when the staff do come into the room for this one, we'll pick this one up and ask questions on it and complete this item. So while we're waiting for the staff to arrive, let's now move forward to item 11, Pest-Free Banks Peninsula MOU, and we do have staff here for this, so that's great. So maybe if you'd like to make some intro. This came through your committee, Pauline, as well?
It did, yes.
Yep.
We've been quite busy. So, the Pest-Free Banks Peninsula Memorandum of Understanding, the committee is recommending strongly that Council endorse this MOU. This is a wonderful community-led partnership initiated by the Banks Peninsula Conservation Trust and in a collaboration with the Regional Council, DOC, Koko, Rarata, Runanga, Rod Donald Trust, Selwa District Council, the Summit Road Society and the Christchurch City Council. And the purpose of the memorandum reads, ensuring Banks Peninsula Te Pātaka o Rakahotu is effectively free of pest animals, so the indigenous biodiversity is thriving and becoming more widespread across the peninsula and into Christchurch City. This MOU is not legally binding, does not commit council to provide any funding, but I'd like to congratulate the Banks Peninsula Community Board, Pam was here earlier, for endorsing this MOU, and also to all the parties for sharing this ecological vision. And the ITI also supports the council nomination of the Deputy Mayor and one other councillor to sign the MOU. So over to you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Is there any comment from staff on this one? Excellent, that's great. All right, so are there any questions? So can I have a mover for this? Oh, now what we're suggesting is that Councillor Scandrett be the other person that signed this. So we've got myself and Councillor Scandrett to sign. So can I have a mover for this? Pauline, seconded by Mike. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Great, thank you. So now we've got the staff here for the flood post-event report, is that right? Okay, so moving forward then to number 13, the draft submission on the proposed national planning standards. Okay, and I will invite staff to speak to this report before we consider it.
So this is the proposed council submission on the national planning standards, which were notified by the Ministry of the Environment. And the national planning standards requires a template for the council's district plan and a number of mandatory definitions that need to be inserted into the council's district plan. In general, the key points in the submission are that we support the objective of the planning standards, which is to provide greater consistency between plans and make them easier to use, but that we oppose certain aspects of the proposed standards that would potentially create additional work or make it more difficult for local councils to set strategic directions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this? Okay, so do I have... Oh, Phil.
Just one. Look, thank you for this, because clearly it's important to get this right, and maybe it's because it's a while since I was across the district plan, I was a wee bit confused, but I'm just wondering, were we satisfied around any sort of changes regarding intensification, because given some of the problems we discussed at the time of the district plan, and given that we, in the future, a lot of us would like to see some changes to that, Alison.
So the draft planning standards don't specifically prescribe content other than definitions. So for the most part, the council would be able to use those definitions in context in different ways. So it could still determine what's the appropriate density for different zones. But the planning standards they limit the number of zones that the council can create, and it has purpose statements for each zones. And I don't think the intention of the standards is to prescribe density for those different zones, but potentially they could be read that way. So one of the key points in the submission is also that we want to make sure that that's not statutory content, that that's just guidance, and that the council still has the ability to determine what's an appropriate level of density for the different zones.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, so I'm happy to move this. Do I have a seconder? Tim? Thank you. Any debate? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will wait for the staff to arrive. So we think there might be, what, maybe 5 minutes away? Okay. So we're just waiting for the staff to arrive to answer questions on the flood post-event report paper. As soon as they arrive, we'll continue with that item, and then we've got the one public excluded item to deal with after that. So why don't we just take literally 5 minutes in the anticipation that staff will have arrived by that time. So if we are back here at 12:15, when we'd expect to have staff in the room so that we can complete item 10, and then we'll move into the public excluded item. The meeting back to order. So back to item 10, the Christchurch Christchurch flood post-event report. Now, Rebecca, welcome to the table. That's great. Before we get you to start answering some questions, I just want to check that we've still got Yanni with us. Yanni, are you still there?
Yeah, I am. I don't think you could hear me on the last item. I was here, but that's okay, just in regards to planning.
All right, great. But you're with us now. That's good. So now let's move into questions then on item 10. So starting with Glenn. Glenn, you had a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for coming to orders. I just wanted to reconcile what looks like some statements that perhaps aren't quite joining up, and also to get a sense of perspective over events. So if you want to offer that as well at some point over the number of cars, etc., that would be good. And on that note, okay, I'm going to flip between the first page of the report and page 121, because in the beginning of the report it talks about generally that the response from a CDM event went quite well, and then it follows up with 68 corrective actions. So are you able to provide some perspective over that? I've got some other questions after that, you know, over whether that is, in terms of proportion, usual, normal. It seems a lot to me.
I think, yeah, good morning everybody. I think I can speak quite generally on this matter. The number of corrective actions, certainly from my perspective, would seem to be proportionate. We are heavily invested in developing the corrective action process. It's something that is extremely important, and we obtain feedback from a range of people, including those who have worked in the Emergency Operations Centre. And so the corrective action process is one that is quite nuanced in terms of the issues that are raised and that are addressed. But one of the key pieces of work that we're currently looking at is consolidating the corrective actions from across the emergencies that we've managed over the last couple of years in particular. So there are key themes that keep coming up that we're currently addressing. So for example, EOC rostering is a common theme. So it's a piece of work that is critical to us. It's extremely important that all those corrective actions are documented accurately and that are addressed. And certainly in terms of numbers and proportionality, to my mind that number is not unexpected, certainly.
Right. A couple of more questions. Thank you for that. Just page 119, number 60. Just a minute of navigating around this thing. It talks about the event being a quote-unquote, okay, earlier on, it says the event was a small event. Isn't that rather understating, though, the event, given the effect on people?
Absolutely. I think there's a distinction to be made between the size of the event and the impact on community. And certainly the wording of that is certainly not intended to detract from the impact of community. That is certainly first and foremost in our mind, you know, whether it's one home that has been impacted or multiple homes. I think in terms of proportionality and scale of our emergency response, that wording is probably considered in the light of other activations, and specifically those of the size of the Canterbury earthquakes, for example.
Okay. And thank you. My final question relates to NIWA. That's page, now it's 106 in our big agendas. It might be 38 in your report, and it's the corrective action number 13, where it says there is currently no access to advanced storm surge forecasts, and then it talks about NIWA in the outcome column, but my understanding is NIWA actually didn't advise us of the storm surge. Is that that's correct? So they didn't feed us that?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't comment on that.
Because that added a significant amount. It took South Shore by surprise.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so we're being a bit kind to NIWA there.
So the I think it was the combined factors that NIWA hadn't taken into effect of the low low pressure, the storm surge and the king tide all happening at once. They had forecasted the weather and some of the factors, but they hadn't actually accounted for the fact that it would have such a, with the king tide.
Okay.
And,
so they're responsible for forecasting all of the factors that will go into a certain event. But my understanding is they didn't advise on the surge part, which added a fair bit to the... okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pauline.
I'm just wondering, these events take a really big toll on the staff in our organisation. When we talk about one of the learnings might be, or one of the identified needs is further resourcing, does that, and training for people to be trained in civil defence, so would that actually imply that we could alleviate some of the workload for our council staff if we had more resourcing there? Or is it an area where it has to be our council staff manning that centre?
So at this time, and Rebecca can follow up on what she's done since she's arrived, but at this point of this event, which was July last year, we didn't have a large number of people trained and on the roster. And so that was highlighted as there weren't, we'd had the series of events and the same people were coming into these. Since then, and Rebecca's now stepped into that role, there has been a huge increase in the number of people across council that are trained, the number of volunteers and people we have in our response teams. So that impact shouldn't be the same now because there's many more, but you may want to...
Yes, absolutely. So we've increased the numbers of trained staff, but we also recognise that it's about developing, looking at international best practice and how we can learn from that in terms of things like EOC rostering, for example, EOC rostering practice. And all the initiatives that we're working on currently, whether that be training or EOC readiness, our main focus, or one of our main focuses, is people. I think, we recognise that there have been a lot of council staff that have been involved in a number of activations. We recognise the toll that that has often on people personally, and the effort and the goodwill that is involved in people's participation in our activities. And so everything that we're doing currently is around putting people and people's welfare first, whether that's through ensuring that council staff have access to high quality training, good EOC facilities, and robust rostering processes is critical to avoid people from burning out and becoming too tired during the activation. So that whole staff welfare issue is one that is absolutely paramount. We couldn't do what we do without good quality trained council staff, and we very much appreciate all their efforts.
So it's a combination of, we do need our good trained, skilled staff in there, but you've got more resourcing to reduce the number of hours that they do. I know that people were doing, odd days and days and very little sleep, and staff members who already have an incredible workload week by week here. So we could see the burnout, and I was very concerned about that. So that's really good news.
Absolutely, that's not sustainable.
No.
And it's something that we've recognised very early on. And we need to look after each other and look after our people. It's as simple as that.
There's also been another initiative that's been delivered by the regional Canterbury seeding team. It's the Canterbury 10 team. So there's a response team of 10 people that have been trained up in May, and there's another 10 going through who can be called upon by the territorial authority that's got a response to bring some skill sets in that you might be lacking in particular SIMS functions, or just to give some advice and support and help through particularly those that first 7 days if you've got a lengthy response, so that you can actually manage people's welfare within the territorial authority. So there's a number of initiatives at play there around supporting the resourcing. Yeah.
The only other thing I'd add to that is that as we get better at these events, and this was one of the events that did go well, the burnout's less likely. because I think one of the things that hits people is when they work really hard and then it doesn't go well or they get criticised in the media for things. As we get better at this and things go better and we look after our communities better and our citizens better and they feel more positive, people are more positive about being involved in the event. So I think we're seeing, we're getting better and it takes less of a toll on the people that are there.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you, because this is a huge amount of work. And I raised this at the committee too, but I just want to make sure it does happen. There's a number of areas where, in fact, the outcomes haven't been finished, and some is around the messaging. I'm just wanting to make sure that, given all the work, that these parts would still be completed.
Yes, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a lot of work to consolidate all the corrective actions from across the emergency. So there are sort of common themes. And certainly in future, for future reports, we will be making sure that all the fields are fully completed and that full information is provided, even if we don't necessarily have a current update for you. But yeah, you can be assured that we go through each action item very carefully and it's incorporated into our work plans. So we really endeavour to ensure that nothing is overlooked.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. I just really want to thank you for the work you're doing, and I think that it's about continual improvement. And you've pointed out about the numbers of people required and now lifting. And it just doesn't happen overnight, and it's nothing worse than having people that are not skilled or unable to carry out the roles that they've been given, which is even more dangerous. So I just really want to thank the three of you and all those behind you that have done this and that are continually working on improving. So cheers.
Thank you.
I had a question as well, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. Yanni, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I've sent through some questions in regards to this report. And first off, I did want to thank staff for doing the report. I personally think it's great that we're looking at these events and evaluating what's worked and what hasn't worked. I did have some concern that the report, a bit similar to Councillor Livingston's questions at the start, in that there seemed to be something go wrong on the Friday, and I don't see sort of reference to that. I know in some of the corrective actions there seems to be reference to getting greater collaboration between the contractor and Intel, but just to give you one example, there was heavy equipment sent into Clarendon Terrace that shouldn't have been there, and the people driving the truck, it was quite weird to think that they would go into an area where they weren't safe being in. So I just wanted to kind of check through the corrective action what's proposed in regards to that sort of what we would do differently, if you like, in terms of that.
So we're not aware of that. So we'll follow up on that particular incident. I don't think we've got that recorded. So we'll follow up and just see what record we've got of that incident.
Right. So there was a massive city care truck that was sent in on Friday to, I think, clear the drains or suck the water out, and the flooding was already at such an extent that it was quite hazardous. And you also had local residents who were trapped without any sort of mechanism to deal with it. I personally rang the call centre, and there seemed to be a gap at the call centre as well. So again, I don't want to be critical of the
event, Councillor Johansson, because there were two flood events, and this one is the one where we had response teams in quite early in there, and outdoor knocking, and we had repeated people going out each day. So.
This is the same event. So what happened was along the Heathcote, and it's really great to get the map of the properties that were affected. I also sent through to the comms team when the initial comms came out that there'd been no reference to this area, and as you've seen from the map, it was the area that was most affected, and yet none of the comms going out at the start of the event referenced this area and what we were doing or what people should do. But It is the same event. There was flooding, I think it was about 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon that got quite bad and actually prevented people from being able to get out of their houses safely. The response teams, I think, went out about 6, 7 o'clock at night. So there was a kind of 3-hour period where there was a lot of confusion over our response. And again, like I think, you know, again, there's a lot of corrective actions that you've identified. So I was just a bit surprised to see the initial introduction about things going really well without reference to kind of the initial kind of confusion that seemed to appear on the Friday from my experience.
If I may, sort of generally around that, we'll certainly look into the specific incident that you've referred to. I understand, so there's the issue of response teams visiting homes and residents on a door-to-door basis. We were certainly unaware of any conversation that might have taken place regarding this, but I should add that it's something that we proactively use the response teams in our response to Cyclone Gita, a more recent event, and that worked well and has been incorporated into future plans. So I think that pre-warning of residents through the deployment of the response teams is something that we find to be highly effective from an emergency management point of view, and we've also had good feedback from community around that. So that has certainly been incorporated into future plans. Secondly, if I may just address the issue of public information more broadly. We're doing and continue to work very closely with the Public Information Management Team, or the PEM team as it's referred to. And this, again, are processes which are currently and constantly being improved on thanks to the work of the media team and our collaboration with them. So we recognise very much that communication very early on in the piece is absolutely essential, not just even once civil defence have been activated, but once city services are involved essentially as part of their business as usual processes, then that public information management is a critical part of all of those processes, and is something that we're certainly strengthening and feeding that into our decision making process. The land drainage team have also been doing a lot of work around their business as usual processes, so for surface water flooding, etc., and their response to that. And again, that's another area where we've learnt a lot of lessons, and we're collaborating more fully with that team prior to the transition necessarily into a civil defence response. So there's been a lot of work being done both in that public information space, looking at how we deploy response teams to notify residents, and also with city services. It's absolutely critical that we learn from these lessons, and I'll certainly follow up on that specific incident that you've referred to.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as you referenced, I think we did do some pre-notification at one of the more recent events, which, I just really commend you for picking up on that. That's something that I'd put forward previously, and I think it's really positive. I'm happy to take up the communications stuff offline. If you can see the emails that I sent through around the July event, and I think there's some gaps, so happy to address that. The final two questions I had was, there's a flood defence fund. Has that in the report, the target date was 30th of June 2018. At the public land drainage meetings, one of the issues of clean-up arose, and the feedback we had from the July event is that the clean-up went really well, but anecdotal feedback from those land drainage meetings was people were quite unhappy and it hadn't been as good as the time before. So the Flood Defence Fund, is that set up now? How are we able to access it? And could it assist with things like clean-up?
Perhaps I could answer that. It's coming through the Land Drainage Working Group, and it's at the stage now where we are just organising a meeting that we've been working with the governance staff at the community boards. Yeah, community boards and the service centres, yes. And so then we're going to have a joint meeting with the community boards, get their feedback into it, then it will come back through the committee and and be recommended to council. It has been a long process, but this is a better way to do it because we're actually working with the people on the ground, like you, Yanni, that have got good input to see determine the best way forward. So it's not far off now.
Right, and just the final question was the thing that I can't see in the corrective actions, and I may have missed it. There's quite a few, but we don't appear to have local flooding response plans for each area, and so the response tends to be quite high level. And I just wondered whether, in terms of community engagement, whether there's any program in place to develop local flooding response plans with local communities. So in each area of the city, obviously there'll be different things. But for example, along the places in the Heathcote in my ward, one of the issues that was really clear was that people were not prepared to wade through stormwater that had sewage. That people didn't have gumboots, people didn't have proper clothing, they had children that, it was a risk. So I just wondered whether things like, response kits.
That is what you have the opportunity to put that input into when the community board meeting with the land drainage group and the flood defence plan comes.
But I don't think it's part of the flood defence fund. I think it's more strategic planning with our intel, our land drainage, our community around what's the best thing to do.
If we can just answer that one, you will have seen in the LTP levels of service that just came to council for the LTP discussions. There is a level of service around local community action or resilience planning, and so that we have a community resilience team that's working with local communities about the planning around the particular local issues of that area. So in the Port Hills, it may be fires. In flood areas, it might be floods, and in other areas, there may be multiple areas. So there's a team in civil defence that are working with communities.
So, is there a time frame?
The community boards, as Councillor Clearwater said, but they are working progressively with communities to identify issues and plan around them.
Right. So in terms of the Heathcote, which, as you can see from the map, was really badly impacted. Is there a kind of prioritisation around where we'll get those flood response plans put in place first as a priority, based on risk?
Discussions, as Councillor Clearwater said, there's been discussions and planning out with community boards around what their priorities are, and some of the other priorities depend on the community's readiness to participate in this. So we can certainly send the team, resilience team can send you information about that.
Okay, yeah, I just... Again, this has been going on since 2014, and in that time we've seen huge community impact, particularly along certain places in the Heathcote. And I'm just really concerned that we get on top of this as soon as possible, given that it has been outstanding for so long. But thank you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate the corrective actions and the review. I think it's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? All right. So, Pauline, you're happy to move this? Do we have a seconder, Mike Davidson? Is there any debate?
Just
Glenn.
a quick comment. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for this. I know, obviously personally, a lot of the staff. Well, of course, you're involved in civil defence. You act in this role when an event comes our way. We've all read the report. We're grateful for everything done. I just think in the executive summary, though, you've been a bit kind to Niwa, who didn't advise over the surge, which added, as it says, 400 mils, which is a significant amount, and took communities such as South Shore by surprise, and we're grateful for the staff there who came to the rescue. We take sea level rise seriously as one component part of the overall effect when you get those, the perfect storm it's called, which it just, it was here as well. So I think it's important we actually do call out these communication breakdowns. We had it over the Kaikoura tsunami situation with civil defence in Wellington. So, I think it's really important. I take the scope and the purpose of the report is to look at us, but we aren't disconnected from the outside agencies and their provision of information too. But thank you for this and all the work you've done.
Pauline.
Just very, very quickly, I want to thank you as well, and for the staff and all the past events, and I've we've all seen the work that you put in and the stress, and I don't think people realise it's a 24-hour operation and it can go on for weeks, not just during the event but a long time after. So it's really pleasing to see that that resourcing has gone in, there's training happening, and there's some relief there for all the staff and not having to do the long rosters. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and yeah, thanks for coming along to answer these questions this morning. Thanks for all the work done to put this report together. It's great that it's such a comprehensive report. It's great that it's identified some areas for improvement, and of course we've heard this morning that there's already work underway to implement some of that. So excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. So now I'll move that we resolve to, so now I'll move that we exclude the public as set out on pages 290 and 291 of the agenda. Do I have a seconder for that? Dion Swiggs. All those in favour? Say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried.